Have you ever passed by something broken? An old fence, a torn shoe, a pair of eyes behind a chain, and kept walking? What if that glance you ignored was a silent scream for help? This isn't just a story about a dog. It's a story about what happens when one person decides not to look away. At Veil Marks, we don't just tell stories. We unearth the quiet ones that shake your soul. What you're about to see is raw, real, and unforgettable. Stay with us, because somewhere in this story, you might just find a piece of yourself you thought was lost. On the outskirts of Oklahoma, along the dusty stretch of Route 27, sat a gas station that time seemed to have forgotten. The paint on the walls had peeled long ago, leaving behind ghostly patches of color barely clinging to weathered wood. The buzzing neon sign over the shop flickered faintly, as if reluctant to keep announcing a place no one truly cared about anymore. But what caught the eye, if anyone dared to really look, was not the faded signage or the rusting gas pumps. It was what lay beside the third column, closest to the broken vending machine. There, tethered to a rusted iron pole with a chain too heavy for his thin neck, was a golden dog. Not golden like sunlight. Golden like wheat left to rot after harvest, dull, dirty, and matted with dust. His fur was caked with old mud, clumps of leaves stuck to his legs. A plastic bowl lay near his front paws, upside down, completely dry. The metal ring around his neck had left a raw impression on his skin, as if reminding him he belonged nowhere anymore. And still, he sat, upright, silent. Not a single bark came from him. Cars came and went. Tires screeched on gravel. People stopped to refuel, to grab cigarettes, to stretch their legs. Many noticed him. A glance, a flicker of unease. Then they looked away. Every once in a while, a child would point and ask, "Why is that dog there?" And the parents, eyes tired and uninterested, would reply, "Don't touch it. It might be dangerous." Or worse, they said nothing at all. He had no name that anyone knew. No collar, no cry for help, just those eyes. Wet, but not from the wind, not from allergies. From something else, something deeper. They shimmered in the slanted afternoon light, with a sadness so heavy, it seemed like the dog was holding the weight of some forgotten truth no one dared to hear. His body was thin, but not broken. His spirit, cracked, but still present. There was no aggression in him, no warning growl, no white teeth bared in fear. Only a slow rise and fall of his chest, as if every breath he took was measured, deliberate. The way someone breathes when they're not sure if they're allowed to keep hoping. Time passed slowly in that forgotten corner, and yet the dog never moved. He didn't chase cars, didn't bark at squirrels, didn't wag his tail when approached. Maybe he had once, maybe in the first few hours, maybe on the first night, under the cold stars, but not now. Now, he was still, like a statue sculpted by someone who knew heartbreak intimately. People assumed he'd been abandoned, but no one knew for how long. A day? 2, a week? No one asked. The cashier inside the gas station, a woman in her 60s with brittle gray hair tied in a bun, had noticed the dog days ago. She had meant to call someone. But she got busy. Her shift was long. Her feet hurt. And maybe deep down, she was afraid. Afraid that if she called animal control, they'd come and take the dog away. And she didn't know what happened after that. No one did. And so, she just left an old sandwich near the pump on her break and told herself she'd done enough. No one claimed responsibility. And so the responsibility floated, aimless, weightless, between passing strangers and cracked concrete. But even in a place where everything had been forgotten, where signs peeled and lights flickered, this dog remained, as if he were waiting. For someone, for something, not rescue necessarily, but recognition. A moment where someone would not just glance, but truly look. Look into his eyes and see that he was still here. Not gone yet, still breathing, still waiting. And maybe, just maybe, still worthy of love. He had not chosen to be there. That much was clear. He had been left, deliberately, tied too tightly to move, placed in a spot just far enough from the store to be invisible, but close enough to feel every car pass by, every door slam shut, every sigh from someone who looked and then decided not to act. And still, he sat, because perhaps in his heart there was a tiny ember left, a small, trembling whisper that said, someone might come. He didn't need many things. Not a bed, not toys, not even a feast. Just a touch, a voice, a look that said, I see you. But in a world moving too fast, no one paused long enough to offer that. Not until one particular afternoon, when the sun was especially low and the shadows stretched longer than usual across the pavement. That was when a man, older, with tired shoulders and quiet eyes, pulled into the station. He didn't get out immediately. He just sat in his truck, looking, not at the gas prices, not at the fading clouds, at the dog. And for the first time in a long while, someone didn't look away. Not because he pitied the dog, but because somewhere buried deep in the man's past, there was a pain that looked a lot like what he saw now. A chain. A silence. A moment of being left behind. And so he opened his door and stepped out. Not to save the dog. Not yet. But simply to acknowledge him. To let him know that this time, someone had truly stopped. Harold Bennett had lived alone for the past 15 years. His modest cottage sat quietly on the edge of a small Oklahoma town, nestled between an old railroad track and a sleepy maple grove that turned to fire every fall. Mornings were all the same. A single black coffee brewed in his dented kettle, a scratchy record of Sinatra playing softly in the background, and the empty chair across from him that once belonged to someone, well, some dog, he loved dearly. That dog was Duke, a German shepherd with a heart bigger than any war Harold had survived. Duke had been his shadow after Harold retired from active duty. They'd walk every morning, rain or shine, and Duke had a way of looking up at Harold like he understood everything the old man never said aloud. But 12 years ago, during a sudden flood that ravaged the riverbanks near their home, Duke had gotten swept away before Harold could reach him. He never found the body. He just waited and waited, until waiting turned to silence, and silence turned to routine. Since then, Harold hadn't tried to bond with another animal. There were wounds the world didn't see, and Harold had enough of them stitched beneath his quiet demeanor. He filled his days fixing old clocks, volunteering at the Veterans Center, and occasionally talking to Duke's picture as if the dog might still be listening. But lately, Harold had been dreaming again. It started as a whisper, an image of a yellow dog, not quite Duke, but with that same deep, knowing gaze. The dream dog never barked or wagged its tail. It simply sat at a distance, watching Harold with eyes that were almost too human, as if asking him, "Do you still remember how to see?" The dreams grew more vivid. Sometimes Harold would wake up with the faintest trace of dog fur on his sleeve, though he hadn't let a pet inside his home for over a decade. It didn't make sense. And yet, it stirred something old inside him, something he thought had long rusted shut. Then came that Tuesday morning. It was overcast and sticky, one of those days where the air clung to your skin like a memory you couldn't shake. Harold needed gas, so he took the old Dodge pickup and drove out to Route 27, the long, cracked highway that cut across the countryside like a scar. The gas station there had peeling paint and buzzing neon, and the cashier never looked up from his phone. But Harold didn't notice any of that, because as he pulled in, he saw him. A yellow dog, chained to a rusted pole at the far end of the lot. No barking, no whining, just silence. Its coat was matted, its ribs visible. But it was the eyes that stopped Harold cold. They were the eyes from his dreams. He didn't blink. Didn't even turn off the engine at first. Just sat there, staring, as if afraid the vision would vanish if he moved. Then, slowly, like a man returning to a battlefield he never meant to revisit, Harold stepped out. He didn't walk toward the gas pump. He walked toward the dog. Each step felt like pulling something long buried from the ground. The world seemed to narrow to just him and the quiet creature ahead. The closer he got, the more he could see the tremble in the dog's frame, not from fear, but from waiting too long without hope. Harold knelt. The dog didn't flinch. He looked into those eyes, and something in him broke. Not in a painful way. Not like the shrapnel in his leg or the loss of his comrades. This was a breaking open, like sunlight finding a crack in a boarded window. He exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for 12 years. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, though aged and stiff, moved with purpose. "Ben," he said as the line connected, "I need you to bring me Duke's old travel crate and that wool blanket in the attic." His grandson's voice crackled with confusion. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "Don't ask questions, son," Harold said, his voice steady but quiet. "Just come here. Route 27. Old gas station. Bring water, too." A pause. "You found a dog, didn't you?" Harold didn't answer. He just looked at the yellow dog again, and for the first time in years, smiled. A slow, broken, healing smile. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe he found me." Ben was 17, with headphones slung around his neck and the sleeves of his hoodie pulled over his hands. When his grandfather Harold called him with that firm but gentle voice, Ben didn't ask questions. He knew that tone. It meant something mattered. So he drove his pickup straight to the old gas station without really knowing what he was stepping into. When Ben arrived, the late afternoon sun was casting long golden rays across the pavement. The place was mostly quiet, the occasional car whizzing by on Highway 27. He spotted his grandfather right away, not at the pump like he expected, but crouched beside a rusted metal pole near the edge of the lot. Next to him was a dog, a yellow dog. At first, Ben hesitated. The animal wasn't barking, wasn't growling, wasn't even moving. It sat still, tail curled under its body, eyes locked onto Harold, like he was the only thing in the world it hadn't given up on. Ben could see now that the dog was thin, its coat matted with dust and patches of dried mud. A heavy chain was looped tight around its neck, the kind you'd use for an old swing set, not a living creature. "This him?" Ben asked quietly. Harold nodded but didn't look away. "His name's Oliver now," he said. "Get the water." Ben walked back to his truck, pulled a half-full bottle of spring water from the cup holder, and grabbed the bowl they usually kept for Duke, Harold's old dog. He filled it slowly and placed it in front of Oliver. The dog looked up, then down at the water, uncertain. "Go ahead," Ben whispered, kneeling a few feet away. "It's okay." Oliver crept forward like he was expecting a slap. His front paws dragged, body low to the ground, but eventually his tongue touched the water. He drank slowly, almost ceremoniously, each sip measured, as if he had learned that being thirsty was dangerous. Harold stood up and wiped his palms on his jeans. "Let's get him out of that thing." He handed Ben the bolt cutters. They were old and stiff, and Harold had to guide Ben's hands to position the blades correctly. The first clink of metal meeting metal echoed like thunder in that quiet corner. It didn't cut all the way through, just nicked the link. Ben adjusted and squeezed harder. With a loud snap, one link cracked. Oliver flinched. Harold placed a hand gently on Oliver's back. "You're free now, son," he said softly. "No one's gonna hurt you again." They continued snipping, one link at a time. Each sound rang out like a protest against neglect, each snap a rebellion against cruelty. Harold didn't rush. He knew this was a moment that deserved respect. When the final piece of chain dropped to the ground with a dull thud, Harold exhaled deeply, as if he'd been holding his breath for years. Ben looked at him differently then. Not just as the guy who fixed old radios and listened to vinyl records, but as a man who had the guts to stop when others passed by. A man who saw pain and didn't look away. "Grandpa," Ben said, his voice low, "why did you really come here today?" Harold looked at him, eyes soft. "Because I saw him in my dream. And when I saw him here, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Sometimes you just know when something's meant to be." Oliver was free, but he didn't bolt. He stayed there, tail unmoving, body trembling from more than just cold. Freedom had come, but trust hadn't. Harold reached into the back of Ben's truck and pulled out the old blanket Ben had brought, the one that used to line Duke's bed. He spread it out on the asphalt, sat down cross-legged, and patted the spot beside him. "It's not much," he said to Oliver, "but it's soft, and it's yours." Oliver hesitated for a long time. Then, inch by inch, he moved toward the blanket. He didn't curl up on it, not yet. But he lay down near Harold's leg, close enough that his fur brushed against denim. Ben watched in silence. There were no cameras, no social media posts. No applause. Just a boy and his grandfather, and a dog that hadn't been touched with kindness in what felt like forever. Later that night, Ben would write in his journal about what he saw. He'd say he learned something he never picked up in school, that sometimes real strength isn't in muscles or medals, but in showing up for someone who can't ask for help. That courage can be quiet, and compassion doesn't have to be loud to matter. As the sky faded from gold to gray, Oliver finally let his body relax. His breathing slowed. His eyes, once dull with fear, held a flicker of peace. And Harold? He sat still, one hand resting on Oliver's side, the other holding the leash not to restrain, but to remind Oliver that he wasn't alone anymore. Oliver was brought home that afternoon in the back of Ben's old pickup truck, curled up in the corner of a blanket, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space. The sun was setting over Oklahoma's wide open sky, casting golden light across the worn shingles of Harold's home. As they pulled into the driveway, the only sound was the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle creak of the backyard gate opening. The backyard was simple. An old oak tree stood like a guardian in one corner, its thick limbs stretching over a weathered swing. A ceramic birdbath sat half full near the porch steps, and the hum of a vintage radio drifted from the kitchen window. This was not a place of grandeur, but of quiet intentions, of steady hands that patched fences instead of building walls. Oliver was gently led out to the yard. He didn't resist, but he didn't respond either. His body moved, but his eyes were somewhere else. They placed a soft dog bed beneath the tree, left a bowl of water and some food nearby, and then stepped back, not wanting to intrude. Harold sat on the swing with a cup of coffee, while Ben leaned on the porch railing, watching. That first night was long. Oliver didn't sleep. Not really. He paced back and forth, between the base of the tree and the farthest corner of the yard. He sniffed the ground, flinched at the sound of distant cars, froze when the wind blew through the chimes. His food remained untouched, his water barely sipped. Every time Harold or Ben moved, Oliver's head would snap up, eyes wide, legs tense, ready to run, though the gate was closed. At one point, Ben whispered, "Why doesn't he just relax? We're not going to hurt him." Harold, who had seen many forms of fear, on battlefields, in hospitals, in his own mirror, answered quietly, "Because safety isn't something you tell someone. It's something you prove." Over the next few days, they didn't rush him. Harold kept his routine: black coffee in the morning, classical music playing softly in the background, and occasional hums of Frank Sinatra as he tinkered with tools in the shed. Ben, though impatient at times, did his best to follow his grandfather's lead. He sat in the grass a few feet away from Oliver, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes just breathing near him, reminding the dog, without words, that he wasn't alone. But still, Oliver didn't sleep well. Every night, he would whimper quietly, paws twitching in some dream he never wanted to see again. Sometimes he'd bark suddenly and wake himself, looking around in confusion, heart pounding so visibly it made Harold ache just to watch. They took shifts staying nearby, especially during thunderstorms. The first time it rained, Oliver dug under the porch and refused to come out for hours. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday. The day had been calm, even promising. Oliver had eaten nearly half his bowl of food and accepted a treat from Ben's hand, though he still didn't let anyone touch him. As night fell, Ben was out in the yard finishing up a school project. He was helping build a small birdhouse and had accidentally knocked over a can of nails. The metal clatter echoed like a gunshot. Oliver panicked. He bolted, not toward the gate or the door, but toward the corner of the yard near the shed, squeezing himself into the narrow gap between the fence and an old water barrel. He trembled uncontrollably, his breath sharp and shallow, eyes wide with terror that wasn't about this moment, but about hundreds of others like it. Ben froze, guilt washing over him. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, staring at the dog with wide, helpless eyes. Harold walked out quietly, setting down his cup on the porch railing. He didn't approach Oliver. He didn't call his name. He simply sat down a few feet away on the grass, crossing his legs with a soft sigh. "You're safe, son," he said, barely louder than the breeze. "Ain't no one here gonna raise a hand at you. Not now, not ever." Ben looked over, voice low and shaky. "What if he never trusts us, Grandpa?" Harold didn't answer right away. He watched Oliver, watched the way the dog's eyes darted between them and the sky, as if expecting lightning to follow the crash. Then he smiled. Not wide, not fake, but the kind that comes from a place deep and scarred. "Then we just keep showing up," he said. "Every single day, until he starts to believe the world ain't what he's been taught." That night, Harold stayed out longer than usual. He brought an old book, sat by the oak tree and read aloud in a low voice. Oliver didn't come closer, but he didn't move away either. And that, to Harold, was enough. It took many more white nights, some filled with silence, others with whispers and slow songs from the radio. Oliver began to eat more regularly. He stopped hiding every time the phone rang or the wind knocked over a branch. And once, just once, Ben swore Oliver's tail moved. Not a full wag, just a small flick, like a candle starting to warm. It would still be weeks before anyone touched him, months before he'd willingly come inside. But little by little, the space between fear and trust began to shrink. Because in that little backyard, surrounded by rust and music and the smell of old coffee, a frightened dog had finally been given something more than a second chance. He had been given time. And for a soul as bruised as his, that was the first miracle. One morning, Ben walked into the backyard with a biscuit tucked gently in his palm. The air was still cool, the grass slightly wet with dew. The old oak tree stood tall and quiet, casting long shadows across the porch. Oliver, curled beside the base of the tree, raised his head slowly when he heard the wooden steps creak beneath Ben's feet. Ben didn't say anything. Words, he'd learned, weren't needed with Oliver. Instead, he crouched down a few feet away, his hand outstretched, the treat resting in his open palm. Oliver stared at it, then at Ben, then back at the treat. His body was tense, as if one wrong move might send him spiraling back into that shadowed corner of his past. But he didn't back away. He didn't flinch. He leaned in. First a sniff. Then, after what felt like minutes stretched into hours, Oliver gently took the biscuit from Ben's hand. His teeth didn't snap. His body didn't tremble. He simply accepted it, chewed slowly, then sat down and looked at Ben again. Not with fear, but with something else. Something softer. Cautious, but curious. Ben didn't move. He let the moment sit, undisturbed, like a fragile bird resting on an open window. That afternoon, while Ben was reading a book on the porch swing, something incredible happened. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Just a slow, uncertain wag of a golden tail. Barely a twitch, really. But to Ben, it felt like the sound of a door unlocking. He lowered his book and smiled. Inside the house, Harold was sitting in his old recliner, jazz playing low from the radio. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the open screen door. He glanced outside, saw the tail movement, and didn't say a word. He simply nodded to himself, as if the rhythm of healing had started to take hold. That evening, after dinner, Harold sat back in his recliner, a vinyl record crackling softly in the background. It was one of Duke's old favorites, Ben remembered, because Duke used to howl along to the saxophone. Oliver lay a few feet away, eyes half closed. As the music played, he stood up, walked slowly toward Harold, then, without hesitation, rested his head on Harold's leg. Harold didn't pet him. He didn't shift or lean in. He just let Oliver stay there, his eyes turning misty with memories of a dog lost long ago. Ben watched from the kitchen doorway. He didn't speak. The moment was whole as it was, uninterrupted, unforced. From that day, something shifted. Oliver began following Ben around the yard, keeping a polite distance, but staying close enough to feel connected. When Ben studied outside, Oliver lay nearby. When Harold tended to his small vegetable patch, Oliver would sit beside him, tilting his head at every movement. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Ben started bringing books outside again. He'd sit under the oak tree, reading aloud, not expecting Oliver to listen, but finding comfort in the rhythm of his own voice. One afternoon, as Ben read a passage from Of Mice and Men, he paused to take a sip of lemonade. That's when he noticed. Oliver had moved closer. His chin now rested near Ben's knee, his eyes closed, not asleep, but relaxed. No one celebrated. There were no claps or fireworks. But in Harold's home, the air felt different, warmer, calmer. As if the house itself was beginning to breathe again. On weekends, Ben and Oliver started going on short walks, just to the mailbox at first, then down the street, and eventually to the park 2 blocks away. Oliver walked slow, his leash loose, but his eyes bright. Kids pointed at him, asked to pet him. Ben always said, "He's still learning to trust." And most kids understood, offering a wave instead of a touch. Each night, Oliver would curl into his favorite blanket, an old flannel one that had once belonged to Duke. Harold had laid it out on the back porch, not knowing if Oliver would even touch it. But from the first night, it became his spot, his safe place. Ben sometimes stayed overnight on weekends. He'd sleep on the couch, Oliver by the door. And in the middle of the night, when the wind howled too loudly or a truck backfired on the road, Oliver would lift his head in alarm. But instead of bolting, he'd glance toward Harold's room, then at Ben on the couch, and lay his head back down. The fear was still there, but so was the trust. And that trust, earned one small act at a time, became the foundation for something neither Harold nor Ben had expected. A bond that didn't need words, a love that grew in silence. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the plains, Ben stood by the window and watched Oliver sleeping. His tail curled against his nose. The boy whispered almost to himself, "You're gonna be okay, aren't you?" Oliver's ears flicked, but he didn't wake. He was dreaming, perhaps of a day when no one walked past without looking. A day when the world was quiet, kind, and filled with the sound of someone reading by your side. The day had begun like any other, quiet, with the gentle hum of cicadas in the distance and the warm Oklahoma sun stretching its fingers through the trees in Harold's backyard. Oliver lay in the shade of the old oak, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed in a moment of rare calm. Then came the sound of gravel crunching under tires. It wasn't the usual rhythm of Ben's bike or the postman's truck. This was slower, heavier. A pickup truck, dusty, worn, paint peeling off like dried skin, rolled to a stop just beyond the gate. The engine cut. Silence followed, thick and unfamiliar. Ben was reading on the porch when he noticed. He set the book down and stood up, puzzled. Harold, inside, felt the unease before he even looked out the window. The driver's side door creaked open, and a man stepped out. Tall, but slouched like the years had folded him in. He had a gray-streaked beard, wiry arms, jeans that had once been blue, and a voice that rasped as if each word had to claw its way out. "I heard someone picked up a dog from the gas station," he said, squinting toward the house. "Figured I'd come by, just to see." Oliver had lifted his head. Harold stepped onto the porch beside Ben. "Can we help you?" His voice was calm but clipped. The man pointed, or tried to. "That dog, the yellow one, I think he used to be mine." Oliver had risen now. His tail didn't wag. His ears didn't perk. Instead, he took 2 slow steps backward. His eyes locked onto the man, not with fear exactly, but with something hollower. Recognition without warmth, memory without longing. The man knelt a little, clapping his hands softly, like one might to coax a shy pup. "Hey, boy, remember me?" His voice tried to be sweet. It came out wrong. Oliver stayed still. Ben stepped down into the yard, standing between Oliver and the stranger. "You left him tied to a pole," he said. his tone level, but his eyes firm. The man's shoulders twitched. "Look, I had a rough patch, lost my job, lost my trailer. Thought I'd come back for him, but things got away from me." Harold stepped forward now, holding his coffee cup like it might help him steady the shake he didn't want the man to see. 12 years ago, he said slowly, I lost my dog Duke in a flood. I would have waded through fire to find him. You're telling me a gas station was too far? I didn't say that. The man shifted his weight, eyes falling to the dirt. I ain't proud of it. Harold nodded once. Then don't expect pride to be the price of forgiveness. The man glanced at Oliver again, and for a moment something flickered in his expression. Maybe guilt, maybe just embarrassment. He was a good dog, he said quietly. Just too much for me. Oliver's ears turned sideways at the sound of the man's voice. He looked, but didn't move. And then, just as the silence threatened to strangle the moment, he did something small but powerful. He turned away. He didn't bark, didn't lunge, didn't growl or whine or even glance back. He simply turned his back on the man who had once held his leash and walked, not quickly, not fearfully, toward Ben. He reached the boy's feet and lay down slowly. No shaking, no tension, just rest. Harold took a slow breath. I think that tells you all you need to know. The man didn't answer. He looked at Oliver for another beat, as if hoping the dog might change his mind. When nothing came, he scratched the back of his neck, nodded once, more to himself than anyone else, and turned back toward his truck. He didn't say goodbye. The engine coughed to life. The tires kicked up dust as the truck disappeared down the road, swallowed by the trees. When the dust settled, Ben crouched down beside Oliver and ran a hand along his back. You okay? He asked softly. Oliver didn't lift his head, but his tail gave a single, slow wag. Inside the house, Harold returned to the kitchen, pouring fresh coffee into his old mug. He stood at the window, watching the boy and the dog in the yard, and felt something loosen in his chest, like an old knot, finally undone. Later that evening, as twilight painted the world in soft purple and gold, the three of them sat on the porch. Harold in his rocking chair, Ben on the step, Oliver curled beside them, like he had always belonged. They didn't talk about the man. They didn't need to. What mattered had already been said, in silence, in steps, in the decision to lay down beside someone who would never make him flinch again. That night, for the first time since he'd arrived, Oliver slept through until morning. And in the stillness of the house, Harold smiled in the dark, whispered to no one in particular, You're home now, boy. And he was. The sign on the gate read, 8 Willow Lane, and right below it, there was a new addition. Polished brass letters engraved onto a wooden plaque. Oliver lives here. Oliver, once a shadow in the corner of a forgotten gas station, was now a presence that lit up the entire neighborhood. The transformation wasn't sudden. It hadn't come with applause or grand gestures. It had come with quiet mornings, gentle voices, and unwavering patience. But something shifted in the small Oklahoma town the day Oliver came home with Harold and Ben. It was like a seed of something bigger had been planted, and now it was blooming. Ben had taken it upon himself to make Oliver a name tag, not just one of those ordinary aluminum discs from the pet store. No, this was different. He sat at the kitchen table one evening, tracing the letters with care on a piece of soft copper. The front read, Oliver. On the back, Ben had etched, in small, steady print, 8 Willow Lane. I have a family. That small piece of metal meant everything. It meant belonging. It meant someone would look for him if he were lost again. It meant his story had a place and a name. The spot under the big oak tree in Harold's backyard, where Oliver liked to rest in the afternoons, had become something of a sacred space. They even gave it a name: Oliver's Spot. A soft blanket lay there permanently, along with a few of his favorite toys. Harold placed a small wind chime nearby, its delicate notes rising every time a breeze passed through, like music written just for him. One Saturday morning, a journalist from the local paper, the Willow Herald, stopped by. She'd heard the story through a friend who worked at the vet clinic. She sat with Harold and Ben under the shade of the oak tree, notebook in hand. Oliver sat beside them, head on his paws, tail twitching slightly with every breeze. He was invisible, Harold said quietly. Not because he wasn't there, but because nobody wanted to see. The story ran the following Sunday, front page under the title, "The Dog No One Noticed Until One Man Did." There was a photo of Oliver, with his head in Ben's lap, both of them looking at each other like they shared an unspoken secret. It was that kind of picture that made people pause with their coffee, mid-sip. That made people remember what it felt like to care. And it caught on. Children from nearby neighborhoods started coming by. Some would peek through the fence just to wave. Others brought treats, often homemade, little peanut butter biscuits wrapped in napkins with scribbled notes like, "For Oliver, the brave boy," or "Thank you for making our town kinder." The bakery on Main Street, Harold's favorite place for cinnamon rolls, began collecting leftover dough and scraps each evening. They labeled the container Oliver's Friends and encouraged patrons to donate treats for other strays around town. It became a quiet tradition. No posters, no loud announcements, just small acts of kindness, repeated enough to become a movement. Then came the moment no one expected. A woman named Marcy, who lived just 2 blocks away, came by one afternoon with a dog. A small, white, blind terrier she'd found abandoned near the highway. "I used to think I couldn't handle a dog with issues," she admitted, tears clinging to the corners of her eyes. "But if that old man and his grandson could help Oliver, well, maybe I'm braver than I thought." She named her dog Hope. It wasn't the only adoption that followed. Within 2 months, the local shelter reported a noticeable rise in adoption rates, particularly of older or special needs dogs. People weren't just looking for pets anymore. They were looking for connection, for meaning, for something real in a world that often felt too hurried to notice the quiet ones. Back at Harold's home, life went on. Slow, peaceful, intentional. Oliver followed Ben around like a quiet shadow, always just a step behind. When Ben sat on the porch to read, Oliver rested his chin on the boy's shoe. When Harold listened to his old jazz records in the living room, Oliver would lie beside the speaker, as though the music soothed him in ways words never could. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned with streaks of orange and rose, Harold took a piece of paper and taped it to the refrigerator door. Ben noticed it the next morning while pouring orange juice. The handwriting was a little shaky, but the words were clear. Sometimes we think we're saving them, but often they're the ones saving us from forgetting how to feel. Ben didn't say anything. He just stood there, glass in hand, reading it over and over. Later that day, he pulled out his phone and took a picture of the note. He posted it online, with a photo of Oliver lying under the oak tree. The post went viral in less than a week. Messages poured in from across the country. Stories of lost dogs, rescued pets, children learning to be gentle again, adults remembering how to be kind. Oliver had become more than a dog. He had become a symbol, a reminder, a quiet revolution. But the best part, Oliver didn't know he was any of those things. He was just Oliver. He still got nervous around loud noises. Still needed extra time when meeting strangers. Still flinched a little when someone moved too fast. But he'd come a long way. Every day, a little stronger. Every day, a little braver. And every day, without fail, he greeted the morning sun with a soft tail wag, curled up in Oliver's spot, and gave the world exactly what it needed, a reason to keep believing. No speeches, no fanfare, just presence. Just love. Just the quiet, powerful truth that even the forgotten ones can shine again if someone is simply willing to see them. The story of Oliver is more than a tale of rescue. It is a quiet testament to how healing doesn't always begin with medicine or therapy, but with presence. In a world where noise often drowns out nuance, Oliver reminded people that simply being there, truly, wholly present, can mend what's been broken. His journey from silence to trust mirrored the unspoken pain in so many of us, the ache of being unseen, the fear of reaching out again, and the longing to feel safe in our own skin. What makes this story powerful isn't just that Oliver changed, it's that he changed others. He didn't speak. He didn't save lives in dramatic fashion, but he softened hearts, hardened by indifference. He made people pause, and in that pause, they began to feel again. Empathy, humility, wonder. The bond between Oliver, Ben, and Harold became a mirror. People looked at it and saw reflections of their own loneliness, their own desire to be accepted without judgment. And in that reflection, they found hope. Because if a forgotten dog could learn to trust again, then perhaps we could learn to love again. To forgive. To begin. This isn't just a story about a dog who was rescued. It's about how small acts, offering a treat, making space on a porch, sharing a quiet moment, can ripple outward, shifting the emotional climate of an entire community. Oliver didn't just find a home. He helped others find themselves. If this story touched something deep within you, then let it echo beyond the screen. Oliver was just a dog, but to Harold, to Ben, and now, maybe to you, he became a symbol of second chances. In a world that often feels hardened, let's be the gentle ones. As one old saying goes, we are not here to see through each other, but to see each other through. If one man's act of quiet courage can restore a life, imagine what 1,000 of us could do. So please, leave a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Vale Marks. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers, not for numbers, but for meaning. Every new subscriber is a voice that says, I believe stories like this matter. And with your support, we'll keep telling them. More deeply, more beautifully, more truly. Because some stories don't end. They live on, in every heart that dares to feel,